Hello, students. I know today you are at home due to the weather. I don't call it bad weather. I call it because we cannot, yeah, I don't like to call it bad weather, as I said, because God knows what is good for us. So God is providing us water. It's raining and it's winter. So we just have to brace up ourselves for it. For the fact that we cannot challenge nature. God knows what is good for us. So we just have to thank Him for everything. You know? Yeah. Today we are going to continue from where we stopped yesterday. It was quite an interesting lecture, and most of you were not here. So yeah, for those of you that were here, you know what we did yesterday, and it was recorded. So you just have to watch it on YouTube. It has been uploaded. So, yeah, we are going to talk or continue with this session of the module, which we call today Evaluate Project Progress. You need to be able to evaluate the progress of your project. Otherwise, it's like you driving and you don't even know where you're going, you don't check blind spot and whatever. So at the end of the day, you end up getting yourself involved in an accident. So you should be able to know how well your project is going in terms of achieving the success of, yeah, in terms of achieving the success or in terms of the project achieving its purpose. You need to determine as well the cause of encountered problem because, of course, you know, it's not all projects that just go that goes well, let me put it that way, smoothly. In some instances, there could be some hitches or some problems. So you need to review those problems that cropped up or crept in along the execution of the project. And you need to, at the end of the evaluation, to document lessons learned. So, specifically, what are you going to do in terms of evaluating the project? Right. So, what I'm trying to say is, what are you going to look at, you know, that can help you in order for you to be able to evaluate the project? You need to look at the objectives of the project, what the project stand out to achieve. Because when you start a project has got its own objectives, what you set out to achieve at the end of the project. Here we could talk about the deliverables, right? And what the product of the project is going to be at the end of the day, and being able to satisfy the needs, the expectations, the aspiration of the stakeholders. So you need to evaluate your progress of the project to ascertain whether these objectives are being achieved. Then you look at verifiable indicators, the indicators that you've set out at the beginning of the project during the planning stage that can provide you an informed decision as to whether the project is being achieved or whether the objectives of the projects are being achieved. Then you need to look at the time in terms of the time frame because a project, as you know, it got its own deadline, it got its own time frame. So you should be able to see whether the project was executed or is being executed on time or is on schedule, is on, yeah. You need to look at it and see if the progress of the project is going as per the schedule. For example, if you schedule a project to be 1 month. So invariably, at the end of the third weeks, 75% of the project is supposed to be completed. So if at the end of the third week, 75% of the project is not completed, gives you that red flag that something is going on, that the project is possibly running behind schedule. You need to look at the quality of the project as well, right? Because projects are being initiated to satisfy uh, the project objectives or for the project objectives to be achieved. So if the quality of the project is not in according to standard, or the quality of the deliverables or the output of the project, if you will, is not up to standard. So it means that the buying of the stakeholders will also be compromised. Then you look at the resources that have been deployed in executing the project and see how well that the use of the resources have been optimized. Then here we are going to talk about the principles of evaluation. It's very important. For your outcome of evaluation to be credible. So you need to make sure that the people that are doing the evaluation should be outsider, right? We prefer to use outsiders in doing the evaluation. It says that the outsiders stand to be impartial in most cases and independent. So what we are trying to say is that evaluators should be impartial and independent. It's one of the principles of project evaluation. So we don't, in evaluating a project, we don't expect or we don't want a situation whereby the evaluators will be biased. We want a credible report or a credible outcome. Then one must be transparent, right? The process must be transparent. It must be a transparent process, and the evaluators to be utilized should be people with experience, because you cannot engage an evaluator that is not experienced in a specific field to evaluate a project of which at the end of the day is like garbage in, garbage out. You're not going to be able to obtain a credible outcome. Then the outcome of the evaluation should be useful to everyone, even to be useful to everyone as well as all the stakeholders, right? Then one must always involve all the stakeholders in the project. So for an evaluation outcome to be considered credible, it should contain or it should be done within the precinct of the following principle: be partial and independent, be credible, be useful, as well as involving all the stakeholders. Then when to evaluate? When do you carry out an evaluation? Evaluation basically can be done. This is a general evaluation, right? Not only specific to progress evaluation. So, when do you do evaluation? So, you got three times that evaluation could be done in a project. One, during project implementation. Then the second one is at the end of the project. Then the third one is few months after the completion of the project. Right. So the evaluation that is being done during the uh, implementation of the project is mostly concerned with the progress. Right. You want to ascertain if the progress of the project, sorry to say, is up to what it should be, or if there is a good progress in the implementation of the project. Then you have the one at the end of the project, whereby one can look at the achievement of the objective of the project, looking at the deliverables as well as the impact, the product of the project. Then the one that is being done few months after the completion of the project is focused on the impact. We call it postmortem. So, essentially, you have three times in which you need to carry out an evaluation in a project. As we said, the first one is during the implementation, then the second one is at the end of the project, then the third one is few months after the completion of the project, which I say we call another word for it is postmortem, right? Postmortem. So the type of evaluation that is being done few months after the completion of the project focuses on the impact of the project. So now let's try to unpack what is actually the purpose, right, of evaluation, right? How could you improve on what you are doing, right? So what we are trying to say here, as you have it here, is this: the purpose of one carrying out an evaluation of on a project is not the way people look at it literally. It's not a punitive measure. It's a way of you to look at what have been done in the project and see where you've done right, as well as where you couldn't perform the way you should be, and try to devise means on how to improve on your shortcomings. So, the things that you need to preoccupy yourself with when you are doing evaluation is about how could you improve on what you are doing, and have you done what you were supposed to do? So, these are the questions that you need to pose to yourself. And what must be evaluated, right? When you are evaluating a project, these are the things that you need to look at. The areas that you need to focus on. For example, the project schedule, which is the timeline. The project schedule, which is being depicted in most cases by a Gantt chart. So it shows you the starting of the project to the end of the project in respect to the timeline. So the project schedule depicts when the project have started and when the project is going to end. So you need to look at it and see if actually the project, or let me put it this way more clearly, if actually the project have progressed the way it should be from the beginning to the end. Then you need to look at the budget as well. Remember, when you are planning your project, a certain amount of money has been allocated, set aside to execute the project. So you need to look back and see if you have been able to utilize the project justifiably without having what we call cost overrun. Then you need to look at the processes that were utilized, whether the processes were able to work well in such a way that in such a way of achieving the objectives of the project. You need to look at the structure of the project itself. So when we are talking about structure in this sense, we've got different types of structures in a project. For example, you can as well look at the organogram, right? The way people were put into position in, with respect to the line of authorities and responsibilities, how the project was organized in terms of the project manager, how effective was he in giving directives to the team members and all those kind of stuff. Then you need to look at the tasks and activities that have been executed, whether they were executed on time, whether they were executed properly according to standard. So you need to look at all these things. All these things needs to be evaluated. Then you need to look at the team members as well. Perhaps you need to look at the team spirit between the team members, how they were able to network among themselves, without peer-to-peer communications was enhanced, on how things were able to work out uh, with the team members in working together harmoniously to achieve the objectives of the project. Then you need to look as well the policies. You need to look at the policies applied during the project. So when evaluating a project, all these parameters, or rather these variables, if you will, needs to be looked at for you to be able to comprehensively evaluate the a project, the outcomes of a project, or rather the progress of a project. So now, at this point in time, we are going to discuss about the project evaluation tools. We said you need to evaluate a project to see whether the project has achieved its objective or is achieving its objective. So, what are the tools that you need to use or you need to employ for you to be able to achieve the evaluation process? Then we have interview. You could use interview, whereby you need to interview the stakeholders. Then you could as well employ the tool of observation. Besides the observations, you can as well utilize project documentations, whereby you need to look at the various project documents. You review the document, the various project document available to see how well they are or they were in working in harmony of in working together to be able to achieve the objectives of the project. So we are going to talk more in detail about the project documentations that you need to look at. For example, minutes of meetings, you need to look at the policies and all those kind of stuff. So those documents can, in reviewing those documents, it can help you or it can provide you an insight as to whether the project was executed the way it should be in order to achieve its objectives. Then interview, like I said, is one of the evaluation tools that you need to use. You need to conduct an interview with the stakeholders. In doing that, you can ask such questions like the rollout of the project, the problems that were experienced in the problem in the project, as well as the impact of the project. So when you are conducting an interview is very easy. So what you need to do is that you approach the stakeholders, then you try to ascertain how the project was rolled out. From there, you can be able to know whether the rollout of the project was the way it should be or the problems that were encountered during the rollout of the project, as well as the impact of such problem encountered on the project. So that can help you to make an informed decision as to whether the project was able to achieve its objective or why the project was not able to achieve its objectives. So the level of skill and knowledge of the team members needs to be evaluated as well, because if the team members are incompetent of what they need to do or what they were supposed to do, obviously at the end of the day, the quality of the project will be jeopardized. So you need to look at the knowledge and skills of the team members as well. So that one can inform you in terms of how competent they were in executing the project. How effective the schedule were, you need to look at the schedule, perhaps the Gantt chart, then whether the different stages of the project comes in over or under budget. So here you need to look at the budget and see if the budget was or if the expenditure on the project was over budget or under budget. Then you need to look for possible suggestion for improvement to the product processes, right? And how tasks and activities were carried out, you need to look at it, whether it was on time, late, or before time. So these are the things that some of the things you need to look at, as well as the policies or procedures, right? Here you need to look at the document, policies and procedures that facilitated the rollout, whether the structure of the project assisted or hampered the rollout of the project. These are the things. So when we talk about structure, good. Look at the organogram, how people were put into positions in terms of authorities and responsibilities. You need to look at that and see how well it assisted in rolling out the project or how well it hampered the rolling out of the project. Right. Then, when you are evaluating using the tool of interview, these are the steps that you need to follow. It's a kind of a research. It's very interesting, right? So, the first point first point of departure or the point of departure is for you to be able to For you to carry out a credible interview to evaluate a project, you need to draw up questionnaire. You need to draw up questionnaires, right? You draw up questionnaire to use. Questions must be easy to understand. So what we are saying is when you are drawing up a questionnaire, you should make sure that the type of questions that are included in the questionnaires that you want the stakeholders or the respondent to provide answers to must be clearly defined. So it must be easy to understand. You mustn't use ambiguous words or big words that people cannot be able to comprehend. So it must be easy and it must be clear, must be well defined. Then having drawn up the questionnaires, the next step is to interview the stakeholders. Then you interview the stakeholders, perhaps where you need to select samples, then you select samples from the population because if it is something that involves a large population of which you will not be able to administer your questionnaires to the whole population, you need to have a sample. And such sample should be a representative of the population. So there's a way to do that. You've got formulas that can assist in doing that. Then, having administered the questionnaires, to the selected sample. So the next step is you need to collate the questionnaires, right? You analyze the questionnaire from based on their responses. You can be able to draw up, you can be able to draw conclusions, right? And make suggestions. So this is a typical way of doing a research, or let me put it this way: this is a typical way of evaluating a project by employing the tool of interview, right? Then discussions, similar to interview, but this is another tool you can use, right? Just can use a discussion similar to interview, but a number of stakeholders are interviewed the same time and responses. So what we call this, in other words, you can call it a focus group. Focus group. The first one was interview, then this one is a focus group discussion. Could have been written here, focus group discussion. So the difference between an interview and a focus group, it works like this. Questionnaires, you interview, focus group interview, what you do is you put, for example, a small group of people together, then you pose questions to them, then you capture the responses. And you must make sure that you moderate the group. Perhaps there might be some people there that like to talk too much. So they can talk too much to the disadvantage of other people because you want to hear from every one of every members of the group. So you just need to moderate it to make sure that you hear from every respective members that constitute the focus group. Then you can use another tool called the observation. So how does it work? So the evaluator observes the impact of the project and arrive at a conclusion after discussing observation with stakeholders. So you can go to where the project is happening in view of observation, then you observe, you monitor, you see what is happening, then you take down notes. So from there, you can be able to, you analyze the notes that you've taken, which can help you or which can provide insight as to how the project is being done. You go to the site to observe yourself, to see things yourself, how things were being done or how things were done for you to be able to make an informed decision. There are questions to ask when evaluating a project. This aspect is very, very important, right? Evaluation of project is very important. So if you don't evaluate your project, how will you know whether you are doing well? You need to be able to see or to be able to establish if you are doing well. If it is something that you are doing well, then you have to replicate on what you are doing well. So if you are not doing well and there are certain things that are making you not to do what you're supposed to do, or that is hampering your performance. So it will act as a kind of a lessons learned for you to improve on your performance. So questions to ask when evaluating a project. What were the objectives of the project? You must know what the objectives of the project are. Because if you don't know what the objectives of the project are, how will you be able to know at the end of the day when you are doing your evaluation if the objectives of the project have been met? You need to know from the word go what were the objectives of the project. And you need to ask such questions like what were the success factor of the project? Because at the beginning of the project, during the planning stage, there are certain things we call verifiable indicators, right? That can provide you an insight as to when to know if the project is being or is achieving its purpose. Then you need to ask questions like, or a question like, what strategies were used to achieve the objectives? And were the strategies the most cost effective? Because one needs to be conscious about the cost as well, the budget, like I said. Because if the strategies are not well implemented, or let's put it this way, you've got good strategies, right? But those strategies, are they cost effective? You might have strategies that are good, but in terms of cost, they might not be cost effective. Because what we are also interested in is about the cost effectiveness of the strategies in order for one to be able to work within the confinement of the budget of the project. Then, how was the project managed? You need to know, you need to pose such questions as to how the project was managed. Then, was the project carried out within the project budget and time allocation? This is very important as well. It goes with this, the previous ones we said just now. So, this needs to be done within the confinement of the duration of the project as well as the budget, because any attempt or attempted attempt to go beyond the budget of the project, it will render such project unless based on valid reasons. So it can affect the credibility of such project. Then, were the resources adequate? This is another thing that one needs to focus on as well. Were the resources adequate? Because if the resources were not adequate, obviously it's going to impact negatively on the project. For example, if the resources were not available the time it should be available, what is going to happen? It will affect the timeline. So all these things needs to be considered. If the resources were not available, it's going to affect the quality of the project. Obviously, the quality of the project is going to be compromised. So we need to zoom in and ask questions and pose questions regarding the availability of resources or the adequacy of resources for one to be able to establish this and want to be able to establish if resources were available as at when required or adequate enough in executing the project. Then we need to pose such questions again like, did the project reporting take place as planned? Because reporting is very, very important, because reporting can help one to know exactly the progress of the project. It can make one to be aware of how the project is being implemented. And if there are certain reports that one needs to pay attention to. For example, if like the resources are not available or the project is not progressing the way it should be, so one can be able to devise an intervention earlier enough for one to be able to overcome whatever challenges that may have the project may have been experiencing or a country. There was the change management plan effective. Change management. Remember, a project have got a scope, right? The scope of the project needs to be adhered to because the project scope details out what needs to be done. So any attempt for one to go beyond the project scope, it can either compromise the quality of the project or rather compromise the budget of the project or the timeline or the duration of the project. So, like we've discussed in the previous lessons, that one needs to be able to manage the scope of the project. So, any scope change needs to be managed. So there should be a mechanism instituted to manage the scope change of the project, which we call the change management plan. So one needs to pose question to look at how such change management plan was being put in an effective way, or how effective it was in managing the scope of the project. Then what changes occurred, we need to know that the changes that occur. Sometimes there could be changes that can vitiate the original or compromise the quality of the project, or that can make the budget of the project to be escalated, or that can prolong the duration of the project. So we need to know what type of changes that occurred in order for one to establish a fact as to what makes the project to be successful or to be able to achieve its objective, and what hampered the project not to be able to achieve its desired objectives or variable. Then we need to look at, or we need to pose a such question as this. Did these changes has a positive or negative effect on the project? This is what I'm saying, that you need to look at the changes, because changes during the implementation of the project, it has implications. You have several implications on the project. Like I said, it can have an implication on the time. It can as well have an implication on the budget. So you need to look at how grievous, or the magnitude, if you will, of such change that occur, or such changes that occur in the project or during the execution of the project, so that you can be able to estimate the impact of such changes on the project, whether it was positive or negative. Then, who was responsible for rolling out the project? So all these things needs to be established. So these are the questions that needs to be posed to the stakeholders. So you pose these questions. It could be in form of questionnaires, interview, or focus group, as the case may be, or as you deem it fit. Then, by providing responses to these questions, or by the stakeholders providing responses to these questions, then you can analyze the various responses for you to be able to have a good insight as to how the project was executed. Then the people responsible for roll out the project, right, have the capacity. So you need to know the capacity of the people in terms of their competency with regards to skill and knowledge. Could be technical skill, management skill, whether they had the required or the requisite capacity that was needed for by the project. Then you need to pose lastly such question as this: did they have the capacity to carry it out? Right. So if the people responsible for rolling out the project, for example, they could be the progress, could be the project manager, the team members, and whosoever that were responsible for rolling out the project, normally they should have the requisite capacity. So if they don't have the requisite capacity to carry it out, that is a red flag. It tells you that whatever they're going to be done or what they've done can be compromised. So all these things needs to be established in order for one to be able to uh, provide a credible evaluation outcome. So remember, we are still talking about the tools that needs to be utilized, right? We talked about interview, then the focus group discussion, we discussed about that. Then we talk about the observation. Right now, we are going to talk about the project document because you can as well evaluate the outcome of a project by looking at the project documentation. So, what are the things that you need to look at in order for you to be able to provide a credible evaluation of the project? Then we say, for example, minutes of meetings. You can look at the minutes of meetings, right? From there, you look at how what was raised in the minute or in the various meetings that were held during the project. It can provide you an insight as to what was discussed, what was raised, and then you can as well look at the change procedures, right? How the procedures, or rather the mechanisms that were instituted in effective changes to the project. Then the quality management documentation needs to be looked at. A risk management plan or risk management documentation report. Of course, there must be a risk management plan, whereby the risk or the identified risk in the project were documented and were analyzed, as well as strategies to respond to the project risk or the uh, speculated project risk were documented, and other project correspondence that can be used to determine. So you look at the correspondence, but when we talk about the correspondence, there are a lot of stuff that we can talk about. For example, like these days, you can look at the email, right? The communication between the various stakeholders, the key stakeholders, of course. Then you can look at the memo, you can look at the circular, whatever correspondence document that were used in the project. You need to evaluate it to establish to get